November 23, 1943, 0430 hours. Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. The sand is black with blood. Smoke drifts in ghostly curtains across the reef, where amphibious tractors burn like funeral pyres, their metal hulls twisted into shapes that no longer resemble machines of war. The Marine who crouches in the shattered coconut log bunker cannot remember his own name, only the screaming, only the dying, only the bodies floating face down in the turquoise shallows that turned crimson 3 days ago and have not cleared since. His hands shake as he raises his rifle toward the cave entrance 30 yards distant, where movement flickers in the darkness. He has been told the enemy will never surrender. He has been told they fight to the last man, that capture means dishonor, worse than death, that the Japanese soldier is a fanatic who prefers suicide to the humiliation of raised hands. Every training film, every briefing, every whispered rumor from Guadalcanal has reinforced the single truth. The Japanese do not quit. But the figure emerging from the cave is not charging. He is not screaming. He is not detonating a grenade clutched against his chest. He is walking slowly, arms raised, uniform torn, face gaunt with hunger and terror. Behind him, 3 more appear. Then 6, then a dozen. They are skeletal, hollow-eyed, moving like men in a dream. The Marine's finger freezes on the trigger. This is not what he was trained for. This is not what anyone was trained for. U.S. Marine Corps After Action Report Tarawa, November 1943. What happens next will challenge every assumption American commanders hold about their enemy. What happens next will rewrite the intelligence manuals, force urgent cables to Washington, and set in motion a psychological operation more effective than any weapon forged in the arsenals of Detroit or Pittsburgh. Because the Japanese soldiers, stumbling from the caves of Tarawa, soon from bunkers on Saipan, from tunnels on Iwo Jima, from the spider holes of Peleliu, about to discover something that contradicts every word their officers told them, every propaganda broadcast, from Tokyo, every lesson drilled into their consciousness since childhood. They are about to discover that surrender to the Americans does not mean torture, mutilation, or execution. They are about to discover kindness where they expected cruelty. And that discovery will become a weapon more devastating than napalm, more precise than radar, more demoralizing to the Japanese war machine than the loss of entire fleets. The year is 1943, and the Pacific War has entered its second brutal rotation. From Guadalcanal to the Aleutians, across 10,000 miles of ocean and jungle, American forces are grinding northward toward the home islands in a campaign of unprecedented savagery. The Japanese Empire, overstretched and has committed to a defensive strategy built on fanaticism, every island a fortress, every soldier a kamikaze, every civilian a potential weapon. The doctrine is explicit: death before dishonor, annihilation before surrender. Japanese military indoctrination, refined over decades of militarism and Bushido mythology, has created soldiers who genuinely believe that capture by American forces means unspeakable atrocities. Japanese Army Field Service Code, 1941. Leaflets dropped over Japanese positions promised torture. Radio broadcasts describe American Marines as barbarians who mutilate corpses and execute prisoners. Officers tell their men that surrender is not merely shameful, it is a sentence to horrors worse than combat death. This psychological fortress is as formidable as any concrete bunker. American commanders, meanwhile, are confronting a nightmare of logistics and casualties. Each island costs thousands of lives. Each beachhead is purchased with blood. The Japanese fight from caves and tunnels with suicidal determination, turning every advance into a meat grinder. Intelligence officers estimate the war will last until 1947, possibly 1948, if current casualty ratios continue. The invasion of the home islands operation downfall is projected to cost over 1 million American casualties and inflict apocalyptic losses on the Japanese military and civilian population. U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Planning Documents, 1944. Something must change. Some lever must be found to crack the enemy's willingness to fight to extinction. The lever appears not in weapons labs or strategic planning rooms, but in the chaos of battlefield surrender. When the first Japanese POWs are processed at Tarawa, military intelligence officers notice something extraordinary. The prisoners are not defiant. They are not stoic. They are terrified, shaking, weeping, begging in broken English or frantic Japanese. They expect to be shot immediately, or worse. They have been conditioned to believe that American captivity is a fate literally worse than death. But when they are given water instead of bullets, when medics treat their wounds instead of inflicting new ones, when they are fed rations and placed in guarded enclosures instead of being tortured, their psychological collapse is total. Within hours, many are answering questions freely, providing detailed intelligence on troop positions, minefields, tunnel networks, supply caches. Some volunteer to write surrender appeals to their former comrades. The intelligence windfall is staggering. Office of War Information Reports, Pacific Theater 1943 to 1944. This is not mercy for mercy's sake. This is strategy. American psychological warfare specialists, working with military intelligence and the Office of War Information, recognize an opportunity. If Japanese soldiers can be convinced that surrender means survival, that the Americans will not torture or kill them, then the Empire's entire defensive doctrine collapses. Fanaticism requires certainty. It requires the belief that there is no alternative, no escape, no third option between victory and death. But if prisoners are treated humanely, if their testimony is recorded and broadcast, if their photographs are circulated showing them alive and unharmed, then doubt spreads like poison through the Japanese ranks. Doubt kills fanaticism. Doubt saves American lives. By early 1944, the operation is systematized. Japanese POWs are not merely interrogated, they are cared for with calculated generosity. They receive medical treatment equivalent to American wounded. They are fed hot meals, given clean clothing, allowed to write letters home. Some are employed in light labor, others assist with translation and intelligence work. Photographs are taken showing them smiling, healthy, engaged in recreational activities. These images are printed on millions of leaflets and dropped over Japanese positions, accompanied by surrender instructions in Japanese script. Radio broadcasts feature POW testimonials describing their treatment. The message is simple and devastating. Surrender is not death. Surrender is survival. Your officers lied to you. U.S. Army Psychological Warfare Branch documents, 1944. The Japanese High Command is blindsided. They have built their entire defensive strategy on the assumption that their soldiers will never surrender in significant numbers, that American forces will have to kill every defender of every island. But now, cracks appear. On Saipan in June 1944, over 1,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors surrender, an unprecedented number. On Tinian, the figure climbs higher. Intelligence reports from captured documents reveal panic among Japanese officers. Desperate orders, forbidding surrender, threats of execution for anyone attempting to quit the fight. But the threats ring hollow when men are starving, when ammunition is exhausted, when the alternative is a humane captivity instead of certain death. The psychological fortress is crumbling, brick by brick, leaflet by leaflet, kindness by calculated kindness. The Americans are waging a war within the war, a conflict fought not with bullets but with contradictions, not with firepower but with humanity weaponized into propaganda. And the Japanese Empire, for all its steel and sacrifice, has no defense against it. Because the secret advantage the Americans possess is not a new radar system or a better tank or a faster aircraft. It is something far more subversive. The truth that surrender does not mean death. The truth that the enemy can show mercy. The truth that fanaticism, for all its terrible power, cannot survive contact with an alternative. And that truth is about to break the back of Japanese resistance in ways no bomb ever could. The revelation comes in waves, each more disorienting than the last. February 1944, Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. The temperature hovers near zero. Snow piled in drifts against the barracks walls, but inside the POW compound the air is warm. A Japanese naval officer named Kazuo Sakamakatha, first Japanese POW of the entire war, captured after his midget submarine ran aground at Pearl Harbor, sits at a wooden table with American intelligence officers. He is not shackled. He is not beaten. He has been given a clean uniform, 3 meals daily, access to medical care for the injuries sustained during his capture. For 2 years he has waited for execution, for torture, for the cruelties promised by his training. Instead, he has been treated according to the Geneva Conventions with a meticulousness that borders on theatrical. Office of the Provost Marshal General Records, 1942 to 1945. The Americans are not merely following international law, they are exceeding it, deliberately, systematically. because every Japanese prisoner who survives to tell the story becomes a weapon more powerful than artillery. The contrast is calculated and absolute. While Japanese propaganda depicts American forces as demons who desecrate bodies and murder captives, the reality confronting prisoners is so contradictory it induces cognitive shock. At interrogation centers across the Pacific Guadalcanal, New Caledonia, Pearl Harbor, Japanese post-encounter a system designed not to break them through pain, but to disarm them through decency. The Office of War Information, working closely with military intelligence and psychological warfare units, has developed protocols that transform every captured soldier into a potential propaganda asset. Psychological Warfare Branch. Technical Manual 32-252, 1943. Hot food is served on metal trays, not thrown on the ground. Medical personnel treat wounds immediately, using the same sulfur drugs and plasma administered to American casualties. Interrogators speak politely, often in fluent Japanese, asking questions without threats or violence. For men conditioned to expect medieval brutality, the experience is psychologically shattering. The technical infrastructure behind this operation is as sophisticated as any weapons system. At Camp Tracy, a secret interrogation facility in Byron Hot Springs, California, intelligence officers employ methods pioneered by behavioral psychologists and cultural anthropologists. The compound features Japanese-style gardens, tatami rooms, even a small Shinto shrine. Environmental psychology weaponized to create cognitive dissonance. Military Intelligence Service Language School Archives, 1942-1946. Prisoners are greeted by Nisei translators, second-generation Japanese Americans, fluent in both language and cultural nuance, who bridge the psychological gap between captor and captive. These translators, many recruited from the 442nd Regimental Combat Team families and the Military Intelligence Service Language School, become the human interface of the operation. Their cultural fluency, more valuable than any torture technique. U.S. Army, Miss Language, School Records, 1943. When a starving Japanese soldier from Bougainville is offered rice prepared correctly, with proper etiquette, by a translator who speaks his regional dialect, the effect is overwhelming. The cognitive dissonance, expecting monsters, encountering humanity, breaks resistance faster than any coercion. The intelligence yield is staggering and immediate. Within weeks of capture, many POWs provide detailed tactical information, troop strengths, officer names, defensive positions, supply routes, morale assessments. Some go further, volunteering to write surrender appeals or record radio broadcasts. These collaborators, dubbed Nisei POWs in classified documents, though the term is misleading, are not traitors motivated by ideology, but men who have concluded that the war is lost and further resistance is suicide. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey Interrogation Reports, 1945-1946. Their testimony reveals that Japanese soldiers are not the monolithic fanatics portrayed in American propaganda, but conscripts and draftees, fishermen and farmers, men who joined the military because refusal meant imprisonment or death. They are exhausted, malnourished, abandoned by supply lines stretched beyond breaking. They have watched comrades die from starvation and disease as often as from bullets. When offered an alternative to pointless death, many seize it with desperate relief. The propaganda apparatus scales rapidly. By mid-1944, the Office of War Information is printing over 5 million leaflets monthly, each designed with psychological precision. Aoi Pacific Theater Production Records, 1944. The leaflets feature photographs of actual POWs identified by name and unit to establish credibility, sitting at tables with full meal trays, reclining in clean barracks, receiving medical treatment from American doctors. Text in Japanese script provides explicit surrender instructions. Raise both hands. Call out "I surrender" in English. Approach slowly with no sudden movements. Safe conduct passes are included, printed on durable paper that survives tropical humidity. The design is deliberately non-threatening, avoiding aggressive imagery or triumphalist rhetoric. The message is functional and humane. If you surrender, you will live. You will be fed. You will be treated with dignity. Your officers lied to you about what capture means. Psychological Warfare Division Leaflet Catalog, 1944-1945. Aerial delivery systems evolve into precision instruments. B-24 Liberators and B-25 Mitchells fly low-altitude missions over bypassed Japanese garrisons. dropping leaflet canisters that burst at altitude, scattering thousands of surrender appeals across defensive positions, specialized artillery shells, modified 105mm howitzer rounds carry leaflet payloads that deploy mid-flight, saturating frontline positions without requiring aircraft. Field Artillery Technical Bulletin, 1944. Submarines surface at night near isolated island garrisons, using loudspeakers to broadcast POW testimonials in Japanese. I am Private Tanaka of the 18th Infantry Regiment. I surrendered on Saipan. The Americans did not kill me. I am alive. I am fed. You do not have to die. The voices echo across dark waters, reaching men huddled in caves who have not received orders or supplies in months, who know the war is lost, but see no escape from the dishonor of surrender. U.S. Navy Submarine Command War Diaries, 1944. The psychological impact manifests in specific battles with quantifiable results. Tinian, July 1944. After intense leaflet drops and radio broadcasts featuring POW appeals, over 4,000 Japanese soldiers and Korean laborers surrendered during the 80-day campaign. An unprecedented ratio. U.S. Marine Corps Historical Division. Tinian Campaign Report, 1944. American casualties are significantly lower than projected. Entire defensive positions abandoned as their defenders slip away at night to surrender rather than face certain death. Japanese officers, attempting to stem the collapse, issue orders threatening execution for anyone caught with American leaflets. Some commanders confiscate surrender passes, shoot subordinates suspected of wavering, but the threats are ineffective when starvation and encirclement make death inevitable. Men begin surrendering in groups 5, 10, 20 at a time, emerging from tunnels with hands raised, clutching leaflets as proof of American promises. The Battle of Peleliu in September 1944 reveals both the power and limits of the psychological operation. The island's caves and coral ridges create terrain ideally suited for fanatical defense. Japanese commander Colonel Kunio Nakagawa has fortified the interior with interlocking tunnels, pre-sighted artillery, and troops indoctrinated to fight to extinction. For 2 months the battle grinds forward with appalling casualties. The U.S. 1st Marine Division suffers over 6,500 casualties, the highest regimental loss rates of the Pacific War. U.S. Marine Corps. Peleliu Campaign Official History, 1945. Yet even here, cracks appear. Over 200 Japanese soldiers surrender, a tiny fraction of the 10,000-man garrison, but still unprecedented for such a heavily indoctrinated force. Each surrender is a small victory, intelligence gained, American lives potentially saved. Interrogations reveal that many who fought to the death did so not from fanaticism, but from fear. Fear that officers would execute them for attempting surrender. Fear that American promises were lies. Fear that capture meant torture after all. The psychological fortress holds, but its walls are showing fractures. By late 1944, the operation has become industrialized. POW camps across the Pacific and mainland United States house over 5,000 Japanese prisoners, a number that would have been unthinkable. In 1942, Provost Marshal General's Report, 1945. Each camp is a carefully managed theater of psychological warfare. Prisoners are photographed playing baseball, attending educational classes, working in camp gardens. These images are reproduced in newspapers, magazines, and newsreels, then filtered back to Japanese-held territories through neutral countries and underground networks. The goal is not merely to encourage surrender on the battlefield, but to undermine morale across the entire Japanese military structure. If soldiers believe that capture is survivable, that their families might learn they are alive rather than dead, then the certainty required for suicidal resistance evaporates. The Japanese High Command recognizes the danger too late. Interrogation reports from captured officers reveal fury and bewilderment. Our men are being seduced by American trickery. One colonel writes in a diary recovered on Luzon. They show photographs of traitors eating and smiling. How can Bushido survive such poison? U.S. Army G2 Intelligence Summary, Philippines, January 1945. The strategic reverberations echo across every theater, every island, every staff meeting where American commanders calculate the cost of the next amphibious assault. Gilbert, February 19, 1945. The beach is a killing ground of black, volcanic sand where Marines die by the hundreds. In the first hour, cut down by interlocking fire from positions invisible until the moment they erupt. The Japanese have constructed a subterranean fortress, 11 miles of tunnels, interconnected bunkers, artillery casemates, immune to naval bombardment. 21,000 defenders have sworn to kill 10 Americans each before dying themselves. For 5 weeks the battle devours men and materiel at rates that shock even veteran commanders. Yet, amidst the carnage, something unprecedented occurs. 216 Japanese soldiers surrender, emerging from caves with leaflets clutched in trembling hands, choosing life over the glorious death their empire demanded. U.S. Marine Corps, Iwo Jima, amphibious epic, 1954. It is a microscopic percentage of the garrison, barely 1%. But each surrender represents intelligence, gained tunnel maps, ammunition caches, water sources, defensive plans. Each prisoner interrogated is a dozen American lives potentially saved in the days that follow. The psychological operation has not ended Japanese resistance, but it has created fissures in the monolith, options where none existed before. The cumulative effect becomes measurable in blood and time. Statistical analysis by U.S. Army operations research teams reveals that islands subjected to intensive leaflet campaigns and POW radio broadcasts experience surrender rates 3 to 5 times higher than earlier battles. Operations Research Office, Combat Studies, 1946. Okinawa in April 1945 produces over 7,400 Japanese military prisoners and 3,000 Okinawan conscripts. Numbers unthinkable at Tarawa or Peleliu. The 82-day battle still costs 12,000 American dead and 50,000 wounded, still ranks among the bloodiest campaigns of the Pacific War, but analysts estimate casualties would have been 30% higher without the psychological warfare operation, softening enemy resistance. U.S. Army, Okinawa Campaign Analysis, 1946. 30%. Thousands of fathers who return home. Thousands of sons who survive to see VJ Day. The mathematics of mercy are written in lives saved, measured in battles shortened by days or weeks, as defensive positions crumble faster when their garrisons believe survival is possible. The psychological impact on Japanese forces manifests in deteriorating morale and fractured unit cohesion. Intercepted Japanese communications reveal officers struggling to maintain discipline as men whisper about American leaflets, as surrender becomes thinkable rather than unimaginable. On bypassed islands, Rab Boltruck, Wakeresons cut off from supply and reinforcement face slow starvation. Leaflet drops and submarine loudspeaker broadcasts offer explicit terms: surrender and live, or remain isolated until disease and hunger kill you. By mid-1945, entire outposts on minor islands are surrendering collectively, negotiating through intermediaries, officers included. The shame of capture has not disappeared, but it has been recalibrated against the certainty of meaningless death. When the choice is between dying forgotten in a jungle or surviving to rebuild a defeated nation, more men choose survival than Tokyo's propaganda machine believed possible. Allied translator and interpreter section reports, 1945, the human dimension runs deeper than tactical advantage. For American forces, particularly Marines who have endured the horror of fighting an enemy that never quits, the policy of humane treatment offers psychological relief, a counter-narrative to the dehumanization that combat demands. Medical corpsmen who treat Japanese wounded with the same urgency as American casualties report that it preserves their own humanity in an inhumane war. We weren't fighting monsters anymore. One Navy corpsman writes in his diary after treating POWs on Saipan. They were just soldiers, scared and broken like anyone else. Helping them helped us remember who we were. Personal papers, U.S. Navy Hospital Corpsman, archived at National World War II Museum. The policy prevents the descent into total barbarism, maintains moral boundaries even as the conflict grinds toward apocalyptic conclusion. It is strategic and humane simultaneously, a rare convergence of military necessity and ethical conduct. For the Japanese prisoners themselves, the experience becomes a form of ideological conversion. Many spend months or years in POW camps, witnessing American industrial abundance, democratic processes, treatment that contradicts every element of their indoctrination. Some assist in translating captured documents, analyzing Japanese military communications, preparing intelligence reports. A select few, the most cooperative, are recruited into the Office of War Information's Pacific Theater Operations, writing surrender appeals, and recording broadcasts targeted at specific Japanese units. These collaborators inhabit a psychological limbo, condemned as traitors by the empire they served, but treated as valuable assets by their captors. Their post-war lives become studies in dislocation, returning to a defeated Japan where surrender carries permanent stigma, carrying memories of American kindness that complicates simple narratives of occupation and reconstruction. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Morale Division reports, 1946. The operations architects, military intelligence officers, psychological warfare specialists, cultural advisors recognize they are conducting an experiment with implications beyond the immediate conflict. Brigadier General Bonifellas, Chief of Psychological Warfare in the Southwest Pacific, writes in a classified after-action report that the humane treatment policy achieved strategic results impossible through firepower alone, creating pathways to surrender that saved thousands of American lives while undermining enemy morale more effectively than any bombing campaign. Fellows report to MacArthur, September 1945, National Archives. The success influences post-war occupation policy. When American forces land in Japan after the surrender, they arrive with explicit orders to treat the civilian population with respect and dignity, to demonstrate that defeat does not mean destruction. The same psychological principles that encouraged battlefield surrender now facilitate reconstruction, contradicting expectations to create compliance, using decency as a tool of pacification. The engineering of this psychological infrastructure required contributions often invisible in combat histories. Nisei, linguist many, whose own families were imprisoned in American internment camps, provided the cultural expertise that made surrender appeals credible rather than clumsy propaganda. Printing facilities across the Pacific operated around the clock, producing millions of leaflets, requiring technicians, paper suppliers, logistics personnel, managing supply chains from California to forward areas, radio broadcast equipment, loudspeaker systems mounted on submarines and aircraft, photographic laboratories, processing POW images. Each represented technical challenges solved by engineers and specialists whose names appear in no monuments, but whose work saved lives as surely as any medic or rifleman. Military Intelligence Service Association records, post-war documentation, the enemy perspective, reconstructed from post-war interrogations and captured diaries, reveals the operation's psychological devastation. Japanese soldiers describe the cognitive dissonance as unbearable propaganda, promising torture, reality delivering kindness. I prepared to die, but they gave me rice and medicine. One captured private tells interrogators in August 1945, everything our officers said was a lie. If the Americans lied about this, what else did they lie about? Maybe the war itself was a lie. ATI's interrogation report, 357, August 1945. This existential doubt, multiplied across thousands of prisoners, radiates outward through letters, through rumors, through the whispered testimonies of men who chose surrender and lived. It corrodes the ideological foundations of Japanese militarism more effectively than any bombing raid, any naval blockade. It proves that fanaticism requires isolation, that exposure to contradiction is fatal to absolutism. The legacy extends through decades into modern military doctrine. Cold War psychological operations draw explicitly on Pacific War precedents, the Korean War leaflet campaigns, the Vietnam-era Chuhoi program encouraging Viet Cong defections, the Gulf War surrender appeals dropped on Iraqi positions all trace their lineage to the Japanese. POW Operation U.S. Army, Psychological Operations Field Manual, 305.30, 2003. The principle endures: treat enemy combatants humanely, not merely from legal obligation but from strategic calculation, because every defector is an intelligence source. Every prisoner who receives decent treatment is a living advertisement for surrender. In an era of insurgencies and asymmetric conflicts, when ideology motivates adversaries more than nationalism, the lesson remains relevant. You cannot defeat belief with firepower alone. You must offer an alternative narrative, a pathway to survival that contradicts the enemy's propaganda. You must wage war on certainty itself. The numbers tell part of the story. Over 12,000 Japanese military prisoners by war's end. Intelligence that shortened campaigns and saved American lives. Psychological erosion of enemy morale, measurable in intercepts and interrogations. But the deeper truth resides in what the operation revealed about warfare itself. That the most effective weapons sometimes look like mercy. That strategic advantage can emerge from contradicting expectations rather than confirming them. That humanity deployed with